Elena Blackwood stood at the edge of her rose-lined balcony, her hand resting gently on the swell of her stomach. The soft morning breeze played with her silk robe as she looked out over the sprawling estate she had called home for the past 20 years. Everything shimmered with elegance: the manicured gardens, the marble fountain imported from Italy, the helipad at the far end where Damien's private jet occasionally landed with a whisper. It was the kind of life she'd once only dreamed of, and now she was living it. Pregnant, finally, after years of heartache and unanswered prayers. Elena was the image of grace, with dark auburn hair swept neatly into a low bun and features that carried the soft beauty of a woman who had loved deeply and waited patiently. Her eyes, once bright with youthful passion, now held a deeper kind of wisdom, a reflection of everything she had given and endured. She had been there through Damien's rise from ambitious entrepreneur to billionaire real estate mogul, supporting him at every turn, hosting charity galas, smiling beside him in magazine spreads that declared them the couple who had it all. Damien Blackwood was, by all accounts, the perfect husband. Handsome, silver-haired and refined, he was beloved by the public for his philanthropy and respected by the elite for his ruthless business savvy. At every public appearance, he was attentive, doting on Elena, speaking of her with reverence as his foundation. The world admired them. Their wealth and bond were aspirational, a testament to loyalty, success, and enduring love. But behind the polished glass of their lavish world, Elena had begun to feel something crack beneath the surface. It wasn't just the late-night calls anymore, or the overseas trips that always extended one extra day. It was the quiet shift in his gaze when he thought she wasn't watching, the unfamiliar scent on his shirts, the carefully deleted messages that left a hollow trail in his phone logs. She'd found a crumpled receipt for a diamond necklace tucked inside his briefcase weeks ago, one she never received. She hadn't said anything. Not yet. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe she was afraid to shatter the illusion she'd helped build for 2 decades. But now, with new life growing inside her, Elena's instincts were louder than ever. Something was wrong. And deep down, she knew, the perfect life she thought she had was beginning to unravel, one silent thread at a time. The sun dipped low over the Blackwood estate, casting golden light through the massive glass windows of the dining hall where Elena moved about with delicate purpose. Candles flickered softly, their glow dancing across the crystal vases filled with her favorite white peonies. A chef, flown in from Tuscany, had prepared a custom 5-course dinner, and a violinist tuned softly in the background. Every detail was perfect. She had spent days planning the surprise, wanting their 20th anniversary to be memorable, intimate, and filled with love. The final touch was the small velvet box resting on Damien's dinner plate, containing a silver keychain engraved with the date they met on one side, and on the other, the words, "Baby arriving this winter." It had taken her years to conceive. After multiple miscarriages and failed treatments, this baby felt like a miracle. She hadn't told Damien yet. She had imagined his eyes lighting up with joy tonight, imagined him rising from his chair and lifting her into his arms the way he had 20 years ago in their cramped apartment when he promised her the world. At precisely 7:30, she stood at the top of the stairs, her hand resting on the polished railing as she waited to hear the familiar sound of Damien's car pulling into the driveway. But instead, her phone buzzed. She opened the message slowly, her heart already sinking before she read the words. "Emergency meeting in Dubai. Had to leave an hour ago. I'm so sorry. Will make it up to you. Love you." She stared at the screen, the silence around her suddenly deafening. The violinist played a soft note in the background, unaware that the night had just collapsed around her. Elena walked slowly to the dining table and sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the unopened gift box. She blinked away the tears, telling herself it was business. It had to be. Damien had never missed an anniversary before. She poured herself a small glass of sparkling water and stared at the flickering candles, willing herself not to feel foolish. He was under pressure. He'd been stressed lately. She'd seen it in the way he rubbed his temples, the way he snapped at the staff more often than usual. Later that night, after the food had gone cold and the staff had quietly packed away the evening's remnants, Elena wandered into Damien's study. The room smelled like leather and oak and faintly of his cologne. She walked around the desk absent-mindedly, pausing at the edge where a drawer stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Inside, amidst the mess of loose papers and luxury pens, something gleamed under the lamp. Elena reached in and lifted a small gold earring, a teardrop-shaped sapphire nestled in a delicate diamond border. It wasn't hers. She examined it closely, her chest tightening. Damien knew she wore only pearls and rarely changed her jewelry. This was elegant, yes, but unfamiliar. It still held the faint warmth of being recently worn. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply sat in his leather chair and stared at the earring in her hand, her mind running through possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Maybe it belonged to someone from a meeting. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe not. The doubt that had been quietly growing in her heart for months now flared into something more potent, something undeniable. This wasn't just stress. This wasn't just business. It was the beginning of the truth. A truth she wasn't ready to face, but could no longer ignore. For days, the sapphire earring haunted Elena like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. She tucked it away in a small, velvet-lined box and slid it into the back of her vanity drawer, convincing herself to let it go. But she couldn't. Every time she passed Damien's study, she felt its silent presence whispering from that drawer. Her sleep became fractured, her appetite dulled, and her mind was constantly circling the same unbearable thought. Who did it belong to? Damien had returned from Dubai 3 days after their anniversary with gifts and apologies. He swept her into his arms, kissed her forehead, and spoke about future plans with the same careful tenderness he always had. But Elena felt something different now, like she was standing behind a pane of glass, watching her life instead of living it. Every gesture he made, every word he spoke, every detail he offered about his trip felt rehearsed. She tried to tell herself she was imagining things, that pregnancy hormones were playing with her emotions. But deep inside, she knew better. So she called the only person she trusted with the truth, her best friend Maya. They met in the quiet corner of a secluded cafe tucked away from prying eyes. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable as Elena recounted everything: the missed anniversary, the sudden trip, and finally, the earring. "Lena," Maya said gently but firmly, "you've supported that man through everything. If there's even a sliver of doubt, you owe it to yourself and your baby to find out the truth." "I'm scared," Elena whispered, her hands cradling the warm teacup like it was her only anchor. "What if I find something I can't unsee?" "Then you'll face it like you always have," Maya replied. "With strength." That night, after long hours of sitting alone in the garden wrapped in a shawl, Elena made the decision. She reached out to Connor Hale, a discreet private investigator Maya had worked with once during a legal case. Connor had a reputation for getting answers without leaving a trace. They met in secret 2 days later at a hotel lounge downtown. Connor was sharp-eyed and calm, taking detailed notes without showing an ounce of judgment. "I don't need to know everything," Elena told him. "Just the truth. I want to know where he goes, who he meets, and if I've been wrong all along." Connor nodded. "You'll have what you need in 2 weeks. Maybe less." Meanwhile, at home, Damien remained the attentive husband. He kissed her good night, left fresh flowers by her bedside, and sent her loving texts during the day. To the world, and to him, nothing had changed. But for Elena, everything had. Now, every smile Damien gave her felt like a lie waiting to unravel. Every word, every glance, every warm hand on her belly felt like a betrayal in slow motion. And though she continued playing the part of the devoted wife, her eyes were wide open. The doubt had settled into her bones. And soon, she knew, truth would either set her free, or break her completely. The envelope was plain, cream-colored, and thick, resting on the table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Elena stared at it, hands frozen, unable to touch it just yet. Connor had delivered it personally. No emails, no digital traces. He'd looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and caution. "You asked for the truth," he said quietly, sliding it across the table. "It's all in there." She waited until he was gone, until the staff had retired for the evening and the house was bathed in silence. Then she opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The first photograph stole the air from her lungs. Damien, unmistakable in his tailored coat and signature cufflinks, stood outside a limestone villa in Paris, smiling at a woman clinging to his arm. She was tall, strikingly beautiful, with deep red lips, cascading dark hair, and a body barely concealed by a fitted black dress. Vanessa Monroe. The name leapt from the report tucked behind the photos like a poison dart. The next photo was worse, Damien pressing his lips to Vanessa's neck as she laughed, champagne in one hand, keys to the villa in the other. Another photo showed them entering the house hand in hand. The timestamps, 3 nights before their anniversary. Elena clutched the report to her chest and slid to the floor, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might faint. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the intimacy in those pictures. The ease with which he held her, the comfort of routine. This wasn't a fling. This was a second life. A life that ran parallel to the one she had poured her soul into for 20 years. As she sat in the dark, tears streaking silently down her face, the memories began to come, uninvited and cruel. 3 years ago, Damien had gone to London for a week of board meetings. Elena remembered that trip now in chilling detail. He'd brought her back a vintage brooch, claimed he'd barely slept from the jet lag. But there was something different in his eyes when he returned, an odd warmth that didn't feel like relief, but guilt. She'd kissed him anyway and thanked him for the gift. Connor's report revealed more than photographs. It listed flight logs, credit card charges, and apartment leases, all leading to Vanessa. Damien had paid for a luxury apartment in the heart of Paris for the last 10 years under the alias Daniel Moore. The apartment's records showed regular floral deliveries, jewelry purchases, spa appointments, every luxury Elena once thought was reserved only for her. There were even whispers of a child. Neighbors interviewed by Connor had referred to the little girl. Vanessa often walked to the nearby preschool. Blonde, blue-eyed, about 6 years old. Damien had always said he didn't want more children after they lost their second pregnancy, telling Elena it was too painful to keep trying. And yet, he might have had one with someone else all along. Elena didn't scream. She didn't destroy anything. Instead, she folded the report carefully, returned it to the envelope, and walked to the mirror in her bedroom. She stared at herself for a long time, her eyes tired, her stomach rounded with the child she had longed for. She looked like a woman she barely recognized. But she knew what she had to do. The next morning, she greeted Damien with a soft kiss on the cheek and asked how his Dubai meetings had gone. He smiled and told her he might have to go again next month. He looked directly into her eyes and lied without flinching. So she smiled back. She kept up appearances, joining him for dinner with business associates, laughing in all the right places, and pretending to be the woman who still believed in him. But behind her practiced smile, she was studying every detail, every lie, every shift in his voice. She wasn't going to confront him, not yet. She needed time, leverage, and a plan. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was war. And she wasn't going to lose. The restaurant glowed with warm amber light, tucked in a quiet corner of the city that catered to high society and those who wanted privacy above all else. Damien had chosen it for their weekly date night, eager to maintain their public image. Elena arrived precisely on time, dressed in a soft emerald gown that hugged her figure just enough to conceal the gentle swell of her pregnancy. She looked radiant, poised, composed in a way that masked the storm quietly brewing beneath her calm exterior. Damien greeted her with his usual charm, kissing her hand, complimenting her appearance, and ordering their favorite wine. He spoke about an upcoming acquisition, gesturing animatedly as if their lives were still intertwined and unshaken. Elena listened with a slight smile, her fingers curled gently around her water glass. She let him speak. She let him pretend. And when the entrees arrived, she finally leaned forward and said softly, "Who is Vanessa Monroe?" The name hung in the air like a grenade with its pin pulled. Damien froze, mid-sentence, his fork halfway to his mouth. His expression didn't change immediately, but his eyes flickered with something. Panic, confusion, calculation. "Elena," he began, clearing his throat. "I don't lie," she said, louder now, but still with that same terrifying calm. She reached into her handbag and placed the envelope Connor had given her on the table, sliding it slowly toward him. "I know everything. The villa. The apartment in Paris. The dinners. The flowers. Her body in your arms. 10 years, Damien. 10 years. He looked down at the envelope as if it might catch fire. For a moment he didn't move, just stared at it like it was a trap he hadn't seen coming. Then slowly, he pushed it away. "It didn't mean anything," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Elena. I didn't love her. I swear to God, I didn't. It was just something I couldn't get out of. I didn't want to hurt you." The words sliced through her, cruel in their cowardice. Elena's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "You didn't want to hurt me," she repeated, her voice shaking. "You had a second life with another woman. You held her in your arms while I cried myself to sleep wondering why you were drifting away. I begged you to try again for a baby, Damien. I thought I was the problem. And all this time, you were with her." He reached across the table, desperate, but she pulled her hands away as if his touch burned. "Please, Elena. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I love you. I never stopped loving you." Elena's composure cracked then. Her chest tightened, and her breath caught painfully in her throat. She doubled forward slightly, pressing a hand to her belly as if trying to shield the baby from the emotional blow. Tears poured down her cheeks, silent and uncontrollable. 20 years. 20 years of loving him, building a life with him, sacrificing herself to help him rise. Now it all felt like a cruel illusion. "I need you to leave," she whispered, barely audible. Damien stood slowly, eyes glistening with his own guilt, but she couldn't bear to look at him. He hesitated, perhaps waiting for her to stop him, to say anything that might soften her stance. But Elena remained frozen in her grief. So he turned and walked out, leaving her at the table, surrounded by the remains of a perfect meal gone cold. The ballroom shimmered with opulence as the annual Hearts for Humanity Gala reached its glamorous peak. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, violins played softly in the background, and photographers flitted around like bees, capturing the most dazzling moments of the night. Elena, draped in a deep navy gown that accented the quiet strength she had clung to since the confrontation, stood near the stage, greeting donors with practiced grace. Her smile was polite, her posture regal, but behind her calm expression was exhaustion, pain, and the tight knot of anticipation that something else was coming. And then it happened. A hush rippled across the crowd as Vanessa Monroe made her entrance, uninvited but utterly unapologetic. She wore a fiery red dress that clung to her curves, her hand resting pointedly on her lower abdomen. The statement couldn't have been louder if she had screamed it from the rooftop. Conversations paused, glasses froze midair, and every eye in the room turned to her, and then to Elena. With calculated confidence, Vanessa walked straight toward her, ignoring the whispers and the tension thickening around them. Elena stiffened. This was no coincidence. Vanessa wanted a public scene, and she was going to get it. "Mrs. Blackwood," Vanessa said with a smile as fake as the diamond dripping from her neck. "Or should I say, former Mrs. Blackwood?" Her voice dripped with condescension, but her tone was quiet enough to maintain the illusion of civility. Elena's mouth tightened, but she didn't flinch. "Vanessa," she said coolly, "I wasn't aware you were on the guest list." "Oh, I wasn't," Vanessa replied with a smirk, running her hand over her belly. "But I thought it was time I stop hiding. After all, I'm family now. Damien and I are expecting." She leaned in slightly. "He didn't tell you, did he? About the baby?" The room buzzed as the news spread like wildfire. Phones appeared in hands. Eyes darted between Elena and Vanessa, eager for a meltdown, a slap, anything worthy of gossip. Elena's hands trembled slightly at her sides, but she held her posture with practiced dignity. I hope the child inherits something better than your manners, she said softly, before turning her back and walking away. But the damage was done. The next day, social media was ablaze. Pregnant mistress crashes gala. Damien Blackwood expecting with new love? Her name was trending, not for her accomplishments or her charity, but as the betrayed wife in a public love triangle. Friends began calling, some to sympathize, others to extract juicy details. Paparazzi staked out her home, and reporters speculated on when she'd file for divorce, whether Damien would marry Vanessa, and how many children were now in the picture. Elena stopped answering the phone. She stayed in her room for days, curtains drawn, TV off, the sound of her own breath louder than anything else. She spoke only to the housekeeper and Maya, who came each evening with warm food and gentle reminders that isolation wasn't the answer. I won't let her take everything from me, Elena whispered one night, holding her stomach as if anchoring herself. She already took him. She won't take my strength too. Vanessa's performance had done its damage, but it had also clarified something. The mistress wasn't satisfied with Damien. She wanted Elena's place, her power, her image, her dignity. She wanted to win. And Elena. She'd lost her husband, her privacy, her peace. But not herself. Not yet. The storm finally broke one rainy afternoon when Connor Hale called Elena with a voice that sounded tighter than usual. I think you should come to my office, he said. There's something you need to see, something that changes everything. Elena arrived 30 minutes later, rain dripping from her coat as she entered the modest, window-shuttered office that had become a quiet haven for truth. Connor didn't waste time with pleasantries. He handed her a thin dossier, bound neatly, with several photographs and typed pages clipped inside. Her heart thudded as she flipped through the contents, each page unraveling the narrative she thought she already knew. Vanessa Monroe wasn't just a lover. She was a predator. She's been blackmailing Damien for almost 6 years, Connor explained grimly. She first approached him after discovering illegal offshore accounts tied to real estate bribes, deals he buried under layers of shell companies. She's kept everything, emails, documents, signed contracts, bank transfers. And she's been using them to get what she wants. Elena stared at a photo of Vanessa seated beside a sleek black laptop, laughing with a glass of wine in hand. The angle made it clear the image had been taken by a surveillance camera, probably in the Paris apartment Damien had bought for her. Vanessa knew where all the bodies were buried. She's not just after money, Connor continued. She's pushing him to sabotage your public image, leaking stories to tabloids, trying to discredit your foundation, suggesting you're mentally unstable, even suggesting your pregnancy isn't real. She wants your seat. Not just as Damien's wife, but as the respected social force you've built yourself into. Elena's breath caught in her throat. All the invasive headlines, the harsh social media commentary, the subtle whispers at parties, it hadn't just been fallout. It had been deliberate. She slumped back in the chair, one hand pressed protectively over her baby bump. So this wasn't about love, she murmured. Not even lust. It was about control. Connor nodded. She's been playing both of you. Damien tried to end it once, 3 years ago. She threatened to expose everything and drag you down with him. He's terrified of losing everything, his reputation, his empire. But more than that, he's afraid of losing you. Elena looked up, stunned. He still cares. Enough to stay silent, Connor said. But not enough to stop her. That revelation sat like lead in her stomach. Damien had chosen silence over protection. His love, whatever fragments remained, had been buried beneath fear, weakness, and Vanessa's web. And yet, the affair wasn't the true betrayal, it was the manipulation, the cowardice. He had let another woman weaponize her, tarnish her name, and nearly destroy her sanity. Now Elena understood, this wasn't a domestic scandal. It was a war for power, reputation, and survival. Vanessa wasn't simply a mistress, she was a threat. And Elena had allowed herself to mourn a man who had never truly protected her. That part of her, the grieving wife, was gone. What remained was a woman ready to reclaim what was hers. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but when it came, it was unstoppable. Gone was the hesitant woman who had begged for explanations, who clung to memories of a love long rotted from the inside out. In her place stood someone sharper, steadier, forged by betrayal and ready to dismantle the false empire that had stolen 20 years of her life. Elena met with Connor behind closed doors over the course of 2 weeks, collecting every shred of evidence: bank records, falsified company invoices, private communications, hush money transfers, even Vanessa's incriminating voice messages where she threatened Damien with exposure unless he obeyed her demands. One chilling recording captured Vanessa laughing as she planned to leak doctored footage to the press, hinting Elena was mentally unstable and hiding behind the pregnancy to get sympathy. "This isn't just revenge," Elena said one afternoon, standing by Connor's desk, holding a folder thick with legal documents. "This is justice, for me, for every woman who's been painted as the crazy wife, while the truth stays hidden behind money and charm." Connor nodded, admiration barely veiled in his eyes. "Let's burn it down." Elena moved swiftly. Her legal team filed for divorce first thing Monday morning, before Damien could react, before he even realized what was coming. She froze all joint accounts, removed her name from all shared properties, and rerouted her personal assets to a private trust, ensuring Damien couldn't touch a cent. The media caught wind within hours, and for once, it wasn't Vanessa feeding the flames, it was Elena. Her statement was crisp, deliberate, and echoed across every major headline. "I gave my heart, my years, and my loyalty to a man who no longer deserved them. I'm reclaiming both my name and my voice. My child and I will not be collateral damage in a war I never chose to be a part of." While Damien scrambled to contain the legal fallout and Vanessa attempted to spin the story on social media, Elena launched something new, something that couldn't be buried or silenced. The Grace Foundation, named after her late grandmother, was unveiled at a press conference held at the very hotel Damien and Vanessa had once been spotted in. The foundation's mission: to support women from elite or high-profile circles who had been silenced, discredited, or financially trapped by powerful partners. Legal resources, housing support, media protection, and mental health advocacy. All funded by Elena's own assets, and donations from allies who had watched her endure humiliation with grace. "I am not a victim," she said from the podium, radiant in a sleek white suit that contrasted her growing baby bump. "I am a survivor. And I am not alone." The applause was thunderous. Within days, media opinion shifted. Articles that once questioned her sanity now celebrated her courage. High-profile women came forward with their own stories. Vanessa's credibility began to unravel under the weight of leaked recordings and financial ties to criminal activity. And Damien? He stayed silent, publicly shamed, legally cornered, and losing the grip he once had on everything that mattered. Elena didn't need to see him fall. That wasn't the goal anymore. The goal was to rise, on her own terms, in her own name. Not as Damien Blackwood's wife, not as a headline, but as a woman who had walked through fire and come out leading others out with her. She had lost her marriage, yes. But she had found something far more powerful. Herself. The truth about Vanessa Monroe unraveled in the most unexpected and humiliating way. A leaked medical report, anonymously sent to several journalists, revealed what many had quietly suspected but never dared to say aloud: Vanessa was never pregnant. There was no baby. No heartbeat. No doctor. She had faked the entire thing. The symptoms, the frequent hospital visits, the carefully staged photos of her cradling a growing belly, they were all part of a performance. A desperate ploy to keep Damien tangled in her web, to leverage sympathy and legitimacy while Elena's world was falling apart. The public turned on her in a matter of hours. Comment sections filled with outrage and mockery. Hashtags that once glamorized her image now dragged her name through the digital mud. Sponsors pulled out of her lifestyle brand deals, and media outlets that had once featured her on magazine covers now ran exposés about her manipulation. But that was just the beginning. Shortly after Vanessa's deception was exposed, the final hammer dropped. Damien Blackwood was arrested on charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, and illegal offshore dealings tied to his global real estate empire. The evidence, meticulously compiled by Connor and Elena's legal team, painted a clear picture of a man who had lied to the public, his investors, and even the government, all while using Vanessa to help clean up his messes. When federal agents arrived at his office, Damien didn't resist. He looked tired, broken, a shadow of the charismatic billionaire he had once been. Elena watched the news unfold from the living room of her new home, far away from the Blackwood estate. She felt no satisfaction in his fall, just a strange emptiness, followed by peace. It was over. The man she once loved had destroyed himself. Days later, she stood at a podium once again, this time, not to defend herself or address a scandal, but to mark the beginning of something entirely new. I stand here today not as someone who lost everything, but as someone who reclaimed her truth, she said, her voice steady, strong. This chapter is mine. Not borrowed, not broken. Mine. The cameras flashed. The world listened. And for the first time in a long time, Elena felt fully in control. As for Vanessa, she vanished from public view without a trace. Her social media accounts were wiped. Her brand dissolved. She became a cautionary tale whispered about at parties and in boardrooms, a woman who reached too far and fell faster than anyone expected. Elena didn't care where she went. She had no interest in vengeance anymore. Only the future. Hers, and her child's. A future that no longer bore the weight of anyone else's lies. The morning sun spilled softly across the olive trees that lined the countryside estate in Tuscany, their silver-green leaves dancing gently in the breeze. Birds chirped in harmony, and beyond the stone terrace, rows of lavender bloomed in orderly lines, infusing the air with a calming, floral sweetness. Elena sat in a white linen dress, barefoot, her legs tucked under her as she watched her baby girl crawl clumsily across a picnic blanket. Little Aria giggled as she reached for a wooden rattle, her dark curls bouncing with each wobbling movement. She had Damien's eyes, but none of his shadow. Elena's heart swelled with a quiet kind of joy. It was the kind that didn't need attention or applause. Just peace. A year had passed since everything collapsed, and yet Elena had never felt more whole. Tuscany had given her what New York never could: space, stillness, and healing. The villa she purchased sat on a hill overlooking vineyards that glowed golden in the late afternoon sun. It wasn't extravagant, not by her past standards, but it was hers. In that year, Elena had become more than the woman betrayed. She was now a voice. Her memoir, 20 Years of Lies, had shattered sales records within weeks of its release. Written in raw, unfiltered honesty, it told not only her personal story but the deeper truths behind high society facades, how women were silenced, erased, replaced, and expected to smile through it all. Readers across the globe sent letters. Survivors, dreamers, wives, daughters. Her book had stirred a movement. Elena had never meant to become a symbol. But now that she was one, she carried the responsibility with grace. On that particular morning, as Aria babbled to a butterfly hovering nearby, Elena heard the crunch of tires on gravel. She turned, shielding her eyes from the sun, and smiled when she saw the familiar black car come to a stop. Connor Hale stepped out, casually handsome as always in jeans and a soft blue button-down. He carried a bottle of local wine and a small stuffed rabbit in the crook of his arm. "Did I miss breakfast?" he asked, walking toward her with an easy grin. "You missed the tantrum," Elena teased, standing to greet him. "She's a little dictator before her nap." Connor crouched beside Aria and handed her the rabbit, which she immediately shoved into her mouth. "She has good taste," he said. They settled at the table under the shade of a cherry tree, sipping espresso and watching the valley stretch out before them. There were no grand declarations, no scripted affection. But there was comfort. There was ease. "I finished reading the last chapter," Connor said, tapping the cover of her book. "You ended it with a line that stayed with me." Elena raised a brow. "Which one?" "I lost a man, but I found myself." She nodded. It was the truth. Connor reached across the table, brushing his fingers lightly over hers. "Maybe now, it's time to see what else you can find." The air between them shimmered, not with urgency, but with promise. Elena looked out across the vineyards, Arya nestled against her side now, sleepy and safe. She wasn't chasing fairy tales anymore. There was no need to pretend. This was her life, imperfect, unscripted, and entirely her own. And for the first time in years, she felt free.